Good afternoon, everybody. This is Purple Update Live. I am your host, Joe Johnson, owner of purplePTSD.com and its sister site, VikingsTerritory.com. We are brought to you by Grey Duck Vodka. Grey Duck, get the duck out. A Minnesota-made premium vodka owned by former Vikings great Jack Greenway. We are also brought to you by McDonald's Liquor. McDonald's Liquor is a neighborhood liquor store in South Minneapolis near Lake Nokomis on 51st and 30th. Stop by and pick up some Grey Duck vodka before the game on Monday night. We are also going live from my cell phone because I am extremely unprofessional. I'm only partially kidding. I'm still working on getting my desktop fixed. I am hoping that I will be able to see some of what you guys are chatting about today. Let me see if that's working or not. Unfortunately, yeah, it doesn't look like it. Wait a minute. Ish. I have the profile of Pinocchio after someone asked him whether or not Geppetto touched him inappropriately. Let's see. If the chat works, let's see. Anyway, I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about the upcoming game against Seattle. It looks like the chat's working, so if you guys want to ask me any questions, let me know. Had I known that in advance, I would have titled this Open Line Saturday. But I do have a few things I wanted to talk about, namely the secondary, any improvements over the bye week that they may have made, updates on the injury report, namely in regards to Adam Thielen and Linval Joseph, how the Vikings plan to stop Russell Wilson, and my thoughts, predictions on the game, as well as some playoff stuff. A quick note, I will most likely be hanging out with the incomparable Nick Swartzen Monday night and watching the game downtown. So I'm hoping to do a pregame show with him. So if you guys want to tune in and ask any questions for him, if you're not familiar with who I'm talking about, you should be. He's probably the most famous, or he's definitely the most famous Vikings fan there is outside of Josh Duhamel. Who's they're probably tied. My nod would go to Swartzen. I only say probably the most famous because clearly I'm the most famous. Nah. Anyway, Zimmer was asked about improvements that they Vikings or things they worked on over the bye week. It's no surprise to anybody that the Achilles heel of this team really since week 4 has been the secondary. Ironically, this is a team that has invested a lot of money and draft capital and time into the secondary. The top 4 players on the secondary have between them are 3 first-round picks and a second-round pick. The second-round pick being Mackenzie Alexander, the first-round picks being Xavier Rhodes, Trey Waynes, and Mike Hughes. It's also the position group that Zimmer cut his teeth in coaching coming up through the league, and it's supposedly his specialty. And so, in doing this show and my podcast that I record stream live every Tuesday and then post afterwards, I've talked a lot about just getting back to fundamentals, which is a really sad state of affairs, to be honest. I'm not dumping on them, but the fact that we're this far into the season, that these guys are this seasoned with this offense, and they're getting back to fundamentals is kind of a sign of the times, I guess. But I think what they needed to do. My argument has been, I know Trey Waynes hasn't had the best season either, but he's bounced back in the last few weeks, and I think that he is no longer the liability that I was worried about. Hey, Tang, it's working, man. I can see your question or comment. Tang is our super fan. He's going to get a Christmas present from us this year. He says, Yeah, that's so he says that Rhodes was the only reason that our secondary was good for a couple of years. Him falling off was the downfall of the secondary. Yeah, I mean, I used to love Antoine Winfield. I hope the Vikings pick up his son to play as a safety or even as a corner, to be honest. And like I said, the fact that they're getting back to basics, I think, pertains mostly to Rhodes. Zimmer didn't say that, but it's been my argument that Rhodes, outside of the plays where he's been burned, which there's been a few or more than a few, I think he's struggling to do things the same way that he's done them because his body isn't creating the results or the situations that he's used to. So a lot of the plays he's actually been in relatively good position. The touchdown where he freaked out and threw his helmet and then his mouth guard and was really worked up. It had good coverage, but I think he's used to making that stop. But he's just a split second behind what he's used to in those instances. And so, whether it's age, which it shouldn't be, 'cause he's 29. People always say the athletic prime of a player is between 27 and 31. It's perhaps more injury related. I know that he's worked really hard on staying healthy and doing more stretching and Pilates and yoga. That clearly hasn't worked. I mean, they made a big deal in the Star Tribune about that this offseason, and then he looked gimpy from the first preseason game and even in OTAs and in minicamp. So, again, getting back to basics, I think, was for him just for that reason, to show him, retrain his brain around his new reality, which is that he's slower than he used to be. Getting his head back around. Zimmer's talked about that a lot. Turning your head, you're in position, you're just not turning your head. I think all of that goes back to the fact that he is coping with the new reality of being a hair slower, half second slower, whatever you want to call it. And finding a way for him to just adapt to that. Hearing that really does encourage me, despite the fact that, again, that's something that you don't want to hear this late in the season, traditionally. But hearing that means that I think that Zimmer and company are realizing what the problem is, and they're finding the best or only solution they can think of, which is the same solution I've been coming up with. So, if anyone wants to hire me at the Vikings, I know Wabi's not there anymore, but I could, easily be like George Costanza when he tries to show Danny Tartable how to fix his swing, and then the coach later is like, yeah, everything's going great except for Tartable's swing sucks all of a sudden. That's where I would come in. And so Zimmer talked about reteaching techniques and responsibilities. I think that the responsibilities part is important because this defense is predicated on not overextending yourself because you trust the guy next to you. The guy next to you should be doing what he's doing, so you don't have to think in the back of your head, well, I have to do this and then also worry about this guy doing that. Otherwise, we'll get beat. Just focusing on your job. I feel like a lot of people originally weren't giving the Vikings a lot of a shot to really win on Monday night. I'm a lot more encouraged than I was a few days ago. In looking especially at the Seahawks game from last season, they held Wilson to under 75 yards passing. I think it was 72 yards passing, the lowest in his career. It was a 6-0 game in the fourth quarter. Obviously, the offense was not great, or was terrible at this point in the season for the Vikings last year, and that's just not the case right now, Thielen or no Thielen. So if they're able to even come close to that on defense, I think the offense could have a field day with the Seahawks defense. It is in Seattle. A lot of people are talking about the Seahawks as this, top-tier NFC team, maybe the best team in the NFC, but their pass defense especially is not good. They're 29th in the league in yards allowed. If that's the case, and Cousins can get some time, and Stefanski and company doesn't, get too cute, which I've talked about a lot on this show since launching a little over a week ago, just do what you've done, get Cousins out of the pocket on play-action plays, run Cook the way you've been running him. I think they'll be fine. The Seahawks rush defense gives up a lot of yards as well. The one caveat is that more than other teams, the Seahawks match up against the Vikings really well because they run a lot of 3 linebacker sets. They're not built the same way a lot of other NFL teams are these days, where they run the nickel primarily. The Vikings run these heavy formations more often than not. They're the last in the NFL in regards to the amount of plays they run 3 receiver sets, and that's an increasing thing. That's a Kubiak thing. I think it's based on the fact that the Vikings haven't had a third receiver for a long time. Also, the fact that they have a lot of talent in the tight end position, but they only run 3 receiver sets, the 11 personnel, I think about 28% of the time. The rest of the time, they're running at least a 2 tight end set over 50% of the time. They run 3 tight end sets. Unfortunately, though, the Seahawks have 3 really good linebackers, and they actually have all three of them on the field in this order. Bobby Wagner is on the field 100% of the time. KJ Wright is on the field 94.5% of the time, and then their third linebacker, Eric Kendricks' brother, Michael Kendricks, is on the field 73.1% of the time, which is really disproportionate when compared to what the standard is in the NFL. And so they're built to play and to stop, the 12, the 13, the 22 personnel that the Vikings like to run. And so that'll be interesting, but I think the Vikings can get around that in a few ways. Not to, again, to get too cute, because I think when a lot of people think of being too cute, they think of gadget plays, but doing like they did against the Cowboys, a lot of misdirection screens, slowly developing plays, draw, play action type stuff, bootlegs. I think they'll be fine. But that having been said, I always worry, especially when they have this much time off, that the Vikings coaches are really overthinking things because they have more time. So they're like, oh, we can roll out something really, really great because we have this much time. Now, they gave the team Tuesday to Sunday off last week, so that while the coaches did not have that time off, and were probably tinkering with things, the players weren't there, and the fact that they're getting back to basics again, I'm hoping at least means that they're not gonna get too cute. There's a few comments on here. People are talking about the trading for Jalen Ramsey from the Rams. Okay, so Tang says a first-round pick to the Rams for Jalen Ramsey with Rhodes or Wayne's package in too. I don't know, man. I love you, but I would not trade Wayne's for anything. Trade Trey Waynes for anything. I don't. We don't know what we have in Mike Hughes. It takes about a year to come back from an ACL, especially for a guy that plays the way he does, and I would argue that corners use their knees more than anybody outside of perhaps running backs. Running backwards, cutting, changing direction, so on and so forth. Holton Hill, we don't know that either. I mean, I think a lot of people, and I'm not saying this about you, Tang, but a lot of people think that they don't like Rhodes or Wayne, so they make excuses for guys behind them. They'll ignore the fact that even Mackenzie Alexander has made bad plays, or I'm thinking about the touchdown against the Cowboys where he got bumped off the line and then just stood there, and then Kendricks had to try to catch, was it the tight end that ran that in, the touchdown. A lot of people will kind of forget that these other guys have had glaringly bad plays as well. I'm all for doing something with Rhodes. I think at minimum they need to restructure his contract. I mean, Zimmer, before even Rhodes has started playing as bad as he is now, Zimmer talked about him not playing up to his contract. So I can't imagine that they would just go forward with the status quo. He's going to have to cut his salary at least in half, maybe, to stay. Now, you have Rhodes and Mackenzie Alexander also being up for a contract extension. I think you can't get, or not Rhodes, but Waynes. You can't, Waynes and Alexander, you cannot get rid of Waynes at this point. You just can't. You don't know what you're getting from Holton Hill or Hughes. Waynes is hasn't had the best year, but he's progressed tremendously from where he was. He's arguably one of the top 3 to 5 tackling corners in the league, run stopping corners. He's very fast. He's what Zimmer likes. He's long. He's tall. And as we've seen, it takes a couple years for guys to really get acclimated into Zimmer's system. So that's why I was against outside of what it would take to have get him or to have gotten him. I was against the Jalen Ramsey thing because at the time when people were really talking about that, the Vikings defense was only giving up like 15.5 points per game, which was at or under what their total was in 2017, this year that everyone goes and compares things to. And so I didn't think that you, especially when people were talking about trading Diggs to get Ramsey, I thought you'd get a negligible difference in points allowed, maybe 14 versus the points you would not score on offense without Diggs. I know we've seen what Diggs obviously has done without Thielen here. I mean, Diggs is Diggs. So that was a non-starter for me, as was the idea of trading 2 first-round picks. I'm not as big of a pick guy as most people. I think that just, I understand why GMs in the NFL want more picks because they want to have more chances to roll the dice because it is a roll of the dice, and the more chances you have, the higher the chance that you're going to hit on a player. But I never understood why a guy like Randy Moss, for example, gets traded for a third or fourth round pick, or established players where you're going to get 1,200 yards from this receiver. Why you wouldn't give up? Why he's only worth a fifth-round pick when historically fifth-round picks don't contribute on that level ever, let alone that's their first season. So, yeah, getting Jalen Ramsey would be great, but I think you would have to give up too much to do that. I mean, no one's going to trade. Xavier Rhodes' draft capital right now is so bad. I mean, just based on what I just said. I mean, I'm a little amazed that Jalen Ramsey got 2 first-round picks. I know he's really, really good, but coaches clearly value picks over players, and that's astounding. That's like a what people have given up for young up and coming quarterbacks. Like Jay Cutler got that from the Bears. Or from the Bears gave that up to the Broncos to get Jay Cutler. That didn't work, but typically that's what you're getting. Corners just aren't as valuable when compared to a quarterback. So I wonder what somebody would give up for an up and coming quarterback like a Teddy Bridgewater right now. If a team were to trade with the Saints, I can't imagine the Saints want to get rid of him or would let him go. But man, if Jalen Ramsey is getting 2 first-round picks, Teddy could get whoo. But I would love to see him here, but I have a feeling that the Vikings are going to draft another corner. I think Zimmer would much rather draft a corner in the first round than bring in Jalen Ramsey. Then you have the side of it that not a lot of people have talked about when it comes to him, at least in the Vikings arena, with Jalen Ramsey, and that's just his tirades on the sidelines that prompted what happened in Jacksonville, at least partially. You don't want a guy like that. I think he was upset that they didn't challenge a catch that he thought they should have. While I do think that players should have input on things like that, you have to listen to what your coaches do or say, and if they don't agree with you and they have a different perspective, both sides have a different perspective, but the coaches see things separately as well. So you have to take that into account when it comes to that, and look at the catch itself and look at the replay. Freaking out on the sidelines, I've never been a big fan of. And so I don't know if bringing him in to a system with Zimmer, who tends to get a little mouthy with the media and talking about players. Clearly, I mean, he said a lot of things about Xavier Rhodes. That could just be a recipe for bad things. So I think the solution to me right now, looking to 2020, would be to get Rhodes to take a massive pay cut and look at bringing in some more help. But there's only so much you can do. I mean, Mike Hughes is a first-round pick. Holton Hill could have been a second or third round guy, maybe higher. So you just got to wait for those guys to develop because it just takes time. So there's nothing that's going to happen from what I've seen in the draft that will correct things because it just takes too long for corners to come around. First round guys like Rhodes and Wayne's took a couple seasons to get acclimated. So I understand that's perhaps where the desire to bring in a guy like Ramsey comes from, because you want an established guy who might come on quicker. But I just think it's a bridge too far. I think you'd have to give up too much, and I think there's a lot of risk there as well. Um, yeah, I don't know why the Rams did that. I mean, if they don't make the playoffs this year, which is looking like they won't, that's going to go down as a complete disaster. Speaking of the playoffs, I wanted to quickly go through a couple scenarios in which the Vikings get a first round bye. I'm reading an article from bringmethenews.com. I found it interesting that the Vikings actually have a better chance of getting a first round bye than the Packers do. The Vikings have a 23.6% chance, whereas the Packers have a 15.5% chance. So the first scenario is the Vikings go 4-1 with wins against everyone and a loss against Seattle. The Packers would end up going 3-2. Saints would have to go 3-2. The 49ers would have to go 3-2, and the Seahawks would have to go 4-1. The second scenario is the Vikings go 3-2, and the Packers have to go 3-2. The Saints would have to go 2-3. The 49ers, though, would have to go 4-1, and the Seahawks would have to go 3-2. I actually can't get into it too much because I'm up against the clock here, but the second scenario sounds more plausible. I just don't see the 49ers going 3-2 for obvious reasons. I could see the Saints doing that just based on what happened with the Falcons a couple weeks ago, and they're playing the Falcons this weekend. I could see the Packers losing some divisional games, as I don't think the Packers are as good as people are saying they are. I think we're seeing a little bit of that. They're 1-2 in their last 3 games. In those games, I think they scored 19 points. So I think the wheels are close to falling off there. Not completely. I don't think that ever really happens with the Packers much, but I think the Vikings are going to smoke them, to be honest. I think we're going to get a great Christmas present. I think it's going to be a 14-point win or more. But yeah, I'll leave that. That's a question I want to ask you guys. If it came down to the playoffs, who would you rather play on the road? The Seahawks or the 49ers? And would that answer be different if we played them at home? To be honest, I'm going to change my answer from Morning Joe's earlier this week, and I'm going to say I'd rather play the Seahawks regardless. I guess I get very, very, very tense when I watch football. Very nervous. A case in point, I had to watch that final drive of the Broncos from my front yard through the window, and I'm not just saying that to be cute. I just get very nervous about it because when the Vikings win, I'm so happy, and I love watching highlights and writing articles and talking to you guys about it and celebrating. And when they lose, it's just a whole different thing. And especially now that I do this for a living, and I'm gonna have to, back in the day before I did any of this, I would ignore the Vikings till Wednesday, and that sounds like a fair weather thing to do, but it was just more of a self-preservation thing. I don't want to focus on the negative. It makes me too upset. I'll just wait until they start focusing on the next week's opponent, and then I'll wash my hands of it. And so now that I do this, I have to do that. No, excuse me. And beyond that, we get a lot more traffic when they win. So that's fun too. Because, that means more money to share with the team. But that also means that I get to have shows like today where you guys are really showing me that I'm on the right path with this show and what we're doing with the website. I do want to thank you guys to DOD, Tang, obviously, who was here also chatting earlier, Kelvin, 75. You guys, Tang has been in every show, and you guys have been on a few shows. DOD, I remember you. Calvin, I remember you. Thank you. That means a lot to me. I really think that it's cool that we have this really little show that is growing and that people are coming back to. It means that you like it, and I just can't wait for more people to see it so we can do more open line shows and just post game shows and talk to you about things. While I have you here, Hill and Alexander, yeah, I mean, I guess the question, we'll talk about this tomorrow, is would you rather have keep Waynes or Mackenzie Alexander? I know what my answer is. I think you guys won't be surprised by that answer. I mean, I have a Big Ten basketball behind me. Um, Waynes or Alexander. I think Waynes is obviously more important. He could be our number one corner. He matches up well against a lot of number one receivers. He's long. He's fast. He's not as thick or physical as Rhodes is, but we've seen what that means for Rhodes too. It's taken its toll on him, and so I would keep Waynes as well. I think, especially, and it depends on what happens with Curse and his suspension and all that, and the fact that he has been pretty vocal on social media that he's not happy with the team and all that. That could be a ploy. I don't think that it is, but they haven't really extended his contract or worked on that, and he's mad about it. So he probably won't be here next year. But having the ability to have him fill in at the nickel spot is amazing, and I mean I think we'll talk about this tomorrow too. I'll put it on the list, but they got to keep him. They have to fix whatever is he's upset about. I know that the salary cap is really tight right now, but he's pissed, and he clearly has shown his value. He could fit in at multiple positions, and when you have a roster that is as tight as this one, and where there's really no wiggle room, you have to have guys that can do multiple things, and he contributes highly on special teams. He can play safety, obviously. He can play the nickel spot. He can also fill in at linebacker if you really ever needed him to. He's that big. So I think that needs to be a focus that a lot of people aren't focusing on as well. But Monday night, I will be trying to do a lot of stuff during the game. I'm going to be hanging out with Nick Swartzen, it looks like, and watching the game at a bar. And so I'll hopefully get him to hop on, and you guys can ask some questions and everything. So I will see you guys tomorrow. Thanks for coming. And Tang said we have to look at replacing Linval Joseph as well. Yeah, I mean, I've said this on the show before, but I'll leave you guys with this. They need to in the first round, I would take a 3-tech, and then look at also finding some more value or some depth there behind Joseph. They have it, but I think they really need a 3-tech defensive tackle that's on the same level as the other three guys. I think they had that in Tree Floyd, but we all know what happened there. I think that the discrepancy between the pressures, Danielle Hunter and Everson Griffin before this last batch of games were the number one and the number two guy in pressures in the NFL, but the sacks weren't correlating with that, and that's because a lot of quarterbacks just step up into the pocket and get rid of the ball. Also doesn't help that the secondary has been bad. But if you have a guy that can bring pressure from the inside as well, I mean, that would be huge. I mean, it's already this way, but who do you block? You only have so many blockers, and especially from the interior, you can't really put. It's harder. I mean, you can have a fullback or a running back run up and chip, but it's harder than with defensive ends, throwing tight ends out there or something. So, I think that should be a huge focus. I really wish Sheldon Richardson was still